My name is Sif, and this is a very, very quick reference video about the Nordic ideas around the multi-part soul, because having just the one part of the soul was so 2,000 years ago or something. I know this is relatively difficult to get your head around, and oh my days did I struggle with this concept for the longest time. But let's get right to it. To summarise, there was the belief that the soul had 4 distinct parts. The first was the hammer, spelt H-A-M-R, the skin, the physical stuff, the meat, the bone, the blood, the tissue, etc. The outer shell, so to speak. This is the part which stays behind upon death, that part that gets buried and remains in the dirt or whatnot. The second part is the hugger, spelt H-U-G-R, literally translated to thought, so this is your mind. Most heathens believe, and the lore sagas definitely infer, that it is the hugger which travels into the various afterlives. It's your personality, your memories, you shed of your mortal shell. The third is the fylgja. This may be the part which we understand the least about, because it's quite unexplained and intangible and hard to grasp as a concept. Essentially, this is the travelling part of the soul, the part that often appears in animal form, and can split off most easily and readily, so it seems, from the rest of you even before death. It's sometimes seen as a guardian spirit, a somewhat alien element. Not quite you, not quite something else. Regardless, it is most often seen as representing the fortune or fate of a person, guiding the individual in times of need. There's also the idea that people are represented by their fylgja and prophetic dreams, like we see in the story of Howard the Lame and Atli's dream. Like the next part I'm going to talk about, the fylgja is sometimes seen as being inherited. So here we go, the fourth part, the hamingja. It's normally described as the part to do with luck, but it really encapsulates a lot of what we would consider to contribute to one's orlog, or orlay, or however you prefer to pronounce it. It's the element that is borrowed from those that came before, and will be passed on to those that come after. It's filled with stuff that defines your position in the world, at least when you're first plopped out of the womb. You weave your own weirds, so to speak, but you are given various advantages and disadvantages just by the nature of your hamingja. It determines wealth, power, honour, luck, etc. It can be enriched by an individual before passing it on to the next, if that makes sense. It's the internal stuff which sets you on your starting path. Being an honourable person in your life will ensure that the next person to possess the hamingja is better off. Your actions then echo down the generations, for good and for bad. Side note, the hamingja may be connected to the disya in that they are sometimes represented as taking on a feminine form, and maybe there's a sort of sentience in part of that, a part that works to protect the family through the parts that are passed down, if that makes any sense at all. Saying that, we do have at least one example involving King Olaf II of someone's hamingja being able to be passed down from one person to another, even if they were not related, so literally a case of handing it over there and then. That's something I will touch on in a moment. So here we go, moving on. Quickly break it down. You have 2 parts of you that are firmly you. The hammer and the hugger, your body and mind. The other 2 parts, the fylgja and hamingja, fit more into the idea of inherited parts that are stuck to you, most often carried through the ancestral line, but as we've seen and can infer from the way the Nordic people saw adoption, not always by blood relation. It's all fascinating, but it gets all the more fascinating when you overlay, not overlog, these various sections and view the lore and stories and gods and all of that through this lens. For instance, it is my belief, so theory time, that perhaps the manipulation of weird in some ways able to occur through the hamingja, seeing as it's the part that continues on with or without you. The exotic travelling trance probably involves the hugger, and of course the interaction with spirits probably involves their huggers. The hammer is the grounding element, is the stuff that stays on the mortal plane. Perhaps berserkers take the hammer of wolves and bears to bestow some of their strength onto the individual, with the ritual changing their hugger to become more animalistic, or perhaps they simply take the form of their fylgja. Perhaps there was a way of forcing this part of the soul to change through ritual. To go back to the hamingja, it's certainly interesting that the parts of the soul seem to be able to be controlled in such a way I would normally put automatically under Sather. Being able to choose to pass on that element is so interesting, and oh boy, that seems like a rabbit hole. Stay tuned. Honestly, there's so many ways you can look at it all, and for most we can only guess and theorise. The Valkyries, for instance, manipulate people en masse through battlefields. They potentially strip the Hugo from the chosen dead to carry on to the afterlife. Maybe their wolves battle and devour the Fylgja and the Haminga too, who knows? But the possibilities are endless, and this is one of my favourite parts of heathenry, just the simple going down all the rabbit holes, researching, learning, carrying on knowledge and passing it over onto different other parts of seemingly completely disparate things. Anyway, I'm going on too much. And that was a very, very quick breakdown of the 4 parts of the soul, at least how we see them in heathenry.